Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Stakeholder management is a critical component of doing business, and on this episode of Business Africa, we tell stories of how the continent is managing key relationships with development partners. Welcome, I'm your host, Afolake Onyiloye. The top stories this week. Could a closer working relationship between higher institutions of learning and employers be the solution to the high youth unemployment in Africa? Find out shortly. With the debt levels on the African continent having doubled since 2010, we assess whether Zambia's recent debt restructuring deal could be a blueprint for all the highly indebted countries. Investor confidence for the African continent is still low, with a high risk of perception making it difficult to access the capital. We explore solutions offered by the OECD in partnership with the African Union Commission. With half of its population below 19 years of age, Africa has a huge human resource potential. The continent, however, still grapples with high levels of youth unemployment. Could closer working relationships between education institutions and employers offer a lasting solution to this challenge that gives many government leaders sleepless nights? We'll find out shortly.
With 70% of the continent's population under the age of 30, Africa has a young, vibrant and future-oriented workforce that could drive a wave of prosperity in emerging industries. But first, the continent needs to tackle its problem of youth unemployment. While investment flows into Africa reached a record $83 billion in 2021 after bouncing back from COVID-19, experts note that it is not making enough of an impact on unemployment. Instead of just relying on foreign investment to solve Africa's problems, the continent needs to find new ways to create growth from within, prioritizing young people and their education in a way that helps them create new opportunities could be the solution. Some observers, however, believe it will take more than just classroom learning and private study to achieve this. Not only do students need to acquire hands-on experience by contributing to real-life projects, they also need to participate in networks via conferences, internships, peer-to-peer forums and mentoring. As such, partnerships between universities and businesses can be a way to facilitate some of these formative professional experiences. Netflix co-founder Reed Hastings and African Leadership University host a series of mentorship sessions in the US, with at least 20 students from 11 African countries already taking part.
We talked to Veda Sanase, the Chief Executive Officer at African Leadership University, to share his experience working with employers like Netflix. Welcome to the show. Now, the main concern for employers is that university graduates lack the relevant skills to be effective at the workplace. What do you suggest to remedy this situation?
Well, a lot. We have, every year, 12 million young Africans entering the job market for usually about 3 to 4 million jobs that are available. Not enough flow of capital into Africa to finance businesses. There is no shortage of entrepreneurial ideas on the continent. Lots of young people who are really keen to set up businesses. We experience a lot of that in our institution ourselves. But unfortunately, the kind of capital flow that you see in other parts of the world, you don't see that in Africa. So I think if there's a bigger focus on entrepreneurship, especially youth entrepreneurship, and really create the ecosystem to support them, things can be a lot better on the continent.
Now, closer working relationship between universities and various industries is one way to approach things. But in situations where employers prefer to establish their own institutions rather than work with schools, how do you approach such differences in vision?
Industry obviously has more pressing needs. They need talent that is readily available. They need talent that is very specialized. In many ways, when industry takes on the responsibility of quote unquote training people, it can be very utilitarian, right? The focus is on, okay, I need skills A, B, and C, and I'll focus on developing skills A, B, and C. Whereas what we're doing by working with industry is to prepare young people with the skills required to be successful in industry. But at the same time, we are equipping them with other critical 21st century skills that we think will really prepare them for a future that is very uncertain, right? Recent research shows that 60% of young people who are entering primary education today, the jobs that they are going to be performing when they are professionals don't exist. Now imagine, how do you prepare people for a future like that? And I think you need to find a combination of equipping people to learn how to learn, but also preparing them by making them work very closely with industry very early on, to be ready for the world of work, a very difficult world of work, if I may add.
Policymakers have emphasized the need to improve the standard of higher education programs and strengthen the connection between education providers and employers. I mean, what's even the point when the jobs are not even available?
So the point of doing this collaboration is to really get both parties to realize that it is not sufficient for industry to, continue expecting that talent will be pumped. Talent that is skilled, that is qualified to deliver on the jobs that they want, is just going to be pumped. And there's a ceiling to that, right? But what we really need in the world, on the continent right now, is an education model that is able to equip people with the mindsets and the skills and also the ecosystem, right, to be able to put ideas in the world. And it's doable. By next week, I'll have 1,000 alumni, and my most recent data shows that upwards of 25% of my alums are already entrepreneurs and identifying entrepreneurs, and are collectively already creating over 50,000 jobs. So a model that focuses on the skills, on building businesses and ventures, but not just random ideas, but ideas that are solving real problems and needs on the continent, can help bridge that unemployment gap.
Mr. Sanasi, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Merci.
The effects of the coronavirus pandemic, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and subsequent global financial crisis have made it even harder for highly indebted countries to meet their debt servicing obligations. Could a landmark debt restructuring deal by Zambia offer a blueprint for other highly indebted countries that are desperate for financing to facilitate economic recovery? We'll find out.
Several indebted African countries are drawing inspiration from Zambia, which secured a deal to restructure $6.3 billion in debt owed to government abroad, including China, India, and Saudi Arabia. Under the deal, Zambia's debt is to be rescheduled over more than 20 years, with a 3-year grace period during which only payment on interest are due. Zambia's deal, secured under the Common Framework for Debt Treatment, is backed by the group of 20 wealthy nations and gives hope to Chad, Ethiopia, and Ghana, who have also applied for debt relief under the same framework.
This is a breakthrough because of the way the structure of the agreement is being done. And I very much look forward to codifying Zambia and then using it as a model for other.
In May this year, Ghana entered a $3 billion 3-year program with the International Monetary Fund on the premise of reducing its debt burden. While debt plays a key role in financing development and economic growth, African countries have historically struggled to manage their debt servicing obligations. As of November 2022, the IMF and the World Bank considered 22 low-income African countries to be either in debt distress or at a high risk of debt distress. As such, experts consider its importance to address the debt burden, since it hinders the ability of African nations to tackle other pressing issues like climate change.
At 3.7%, Africa is the second fastest growing in the world, just behind the Asian countries. And yet, the continent does not attract sufficient investment to achieve its development goals. The latest edition of the report by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, in partnership with the African Union Commission, highlights several ways in which African governments and their partners can improve investor confidence and accelerate sustainable investment on the continent. Have a look.
According to the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, real GDP growth in Africa is expected to reach 3.7% in 2023. It's still insufficient to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals set by the UN for the African continent. Africa needs an additional $1.6 trillion by 2030, or $194 billion per year to achieve those goals. While the continent has substantial human and natural resources to attract investors, a higher perception of risk hinders Africa's capacity to attract financing. Effects of the pandemic and subsequent global financial recession have also affected the African continent more than other regions. Africa's share of foreign direct investment fell to 6% in the year 2020 to 2021, while that of advanced OECD countries reached 61%. The cost of capital in Africa has also increased more than in other parts of the world. The OECD report recommends access to better data and information.
Institutions that invest don't have enough good data, and that results in delaying, postponing, or not investing at all in the continent.
The report also recommends better access to investment in public-private partnerships and adherence to criteria of credit agencies to raise debt. It also noted investment from African companies into African countries were more stable than those by non-African companies.
That story on sustainable investment brings us to the end of this week's edition of Business Africa. For more business news and stories, stay tuned to Africanews and Africanews.com.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.